There he is. Cool. Tom's going to talk about a survey he's working on that is quite interesting.
Hi, I'm Tom Scholl with AT&T, and just basically put a survey together for the purposes of distributing it here at NANOG. And what the survey is really about, it's obviously network operators, so it seems pretty relevant for the group here. And some of the main things covered in it is really what technologies are deployed today, what practices are being used within a network, and really to determine maybe what aren't people doing, and potentially what other problems people are going to run into as things grow over the next few years, and hopefully can turn perhaps ideas into topics of things that need to be talked about or presentations to come out of it. But just to really find out kind of where everyone's at, and one of the things is obviously not everyone's going to talk about how they do things in their network in any kind of open forum generally. I mean, there's proprietary information and whatnot. And so it's just kind of anonymous survey just to really find out what's enabled in people's networks and what's going on. So hopefully, by people filling it out, and the URL's at the end of the slides, and hopefully we can get something that could be pretty beneficial for everyone. So who's this targeted at? It's pretty much anybody. If you're a network service provider, selling transit, engaging in peering, content hosting, access providers, enterprises, pretty much anybody. So, if you have enable on a box and you run a network of some sort, this would probably be aiming for you. Some of the questions that are being covered in it kind of spans several different areas. And the first one is routing technologies, peering, operational practices, how you do things within your network, the day-to-day maintenance events, things like that. Network performance, how do you monitor things in your network, security, and future concerns going forward as it relates to vendors, hardware, equipment, potential features, things like that. And I'll go through some of these, through each one of these. The first one is routing technologies, basically going over, do you run MPLS or not in your network? If you do, what do you use? Do you use LDP? Do you use RSVP-TE as your signaling protocol? Or do you use a combination of both? If you use LDP, for instance, are you doing anything to detect label LDP-based black holes? Are you aware of LDP-IGP sync? How do you mitigate things like that? If you're using RSVP-TE, okay, that's interesting. Like, what are you doing with it? Are you using bandwidth reservations? How many individual LSPs do you have as a head-end on a router? What kind of scale are you building out? And if you're using constraint-based routing, well, what kind of constraints are you using? Are you using affinities? Are you doing explicit path hops? How are you building your hops in your network, basically, to find out what are the popular methods in which people are actually utilizing this today? Other things would be layer 2, layer 3 VPN services. Some people have it, some people don't, but obviously each one has its own additional constraints. Layer 3 VPN services, how does that change how you do engineering on your boxes? How many VPN routes can you store? What's the impact on the control plane, LDP or BGP, to actually do this? Do you have VPN route reflectors deployed? How many routes do you have within your network? Other things would be IGP. So, what IGP do you use? Do you use something like multi-topology routing, somewhat new? And also, do you tweak, SPF timers? Do you lower your default timers? Do you set different hello data time intervals? Basically, just trying to find out what knobs people are really using in their network. I mean, if they're actual viable options, or it's only a few corner cases where people actually do some of this. Next one, obviously, is multicast, and going into some of the options there. Another topic covered would be peering, and this is kind of Greg, myself, and I think Ren worked on this like a year or so ago to go over peering practices, and what's enabled. Are you doing anything with BGP? Are you using BFD? And the results are pretty interesting. And this kind of takes a little bit further to come out, like what practices are you doing at public exchanges? At what point do you engage in any kind of private cross connects to do any kind of peering? At what percentage do you maybe consider upgrading a link, or do you wait for people to call up? What kind of policies do you apply to peers? Are you doing community-based outbound filtering, or are you doing like just a prefix list and you don't do anything on top of that? Individual requirements, and just a lot of different questions as it relates to, do you preserve like tossed DSCP bits as they traverse your network? Do you preserve med, things like that. And other parts would be, traffic engineering. How frequently, when you are pairing actively, do you actually have to depref paths because of performance or any other reasons? The other one here is operational practices, and this goes into just the day-to-day operations of your network. So anything like router maintenance, or when do you cost out or divert traffic around a router to do any kind of maintenance work on it, and if so, what kind of maintenance work? If you're just replacing a line card, do you do all the boxes on? That's okay, or do certain things such as route processor upgrades or swaps to a backup route processor? Do you say, oh, we can't take the risk, take it out of service? Really trying to find out, at what point do people consider it that you need to pull a router offline off the network, and do you do that in a graceful manner? Do you try to do a max metric or overload the IGP, or do you do things like, okay, shut down BGP neighbors, or do you do gracefully and try to depref paths and things like that? Just trying to find out what is the norm, or some of the practices that people use there. Another one goes in network automation. How do you communicate with the devices in your network? Are you using something somewhat new like netconf to actually talk to the boxes, or is a lot of your work based on expect-based scripts that are talking to the CLI? Other things would be router event scripts that run actually locally on the router itself, and TCL scripts. Is that something that people are actually doing, or at this time do people kind of want to keep that off the boxes? Network monitoring, do people still heavily rely upon cacti, MRTG, or some other kind of homegrown utilities? Is MRTG still that popularly used out there, or is it off-the-shelf commercial software? What's important there? SNMP, read, write, do people still use write in their network? Just a kind of question throwing out there to see if that's still popular at all. Network performance goes into, well, one question is fast convergence, right? A lot of people are pushing obviously voice and video over the network. Some of the applications aren't all that sensitive when they do actually have packets dropped. So are people actually doing anything for fast convergence? Are they using like IP fast reroute, or are they using MPLS-TE based fast reroute there? Who are there individual applications that require it, and you provide this to all traffic types on your network, or do you only do it to a certain set of traffic on your network? And if so, do you need sub-second, or is it multi-second, or it's just something that will happen when it happens? Other things would be performance monitoring. How do you have probes actively in the network, detecting if anything's going on? Latency changes. Are they running on the routers themselves, or do you have agents that sit off the side of the network? Do you probe things through your transit providers, things like that? Alarming, also, there's a lot of different options for open source software. What's being used there? Or is it something off the shelf? SLAs, are you actively checking for SLAs on your transit providers, or to actually validate that you're getting what you're paying for, or trying to obtain credits off of it? And the final one here is NetFlow and SFlow. For instance, are people actually using NetFlow? What are the problems are you running into NetFlow? Are TCAM exhaustion? And SFlow, is it a viable option for certain people? What are you using it for? What specific applications? Is it for packet sampling, or is it for building, outputting things that bounce off an ACL? Security goes into a few different things here, and it kind of has like an operator slant to it, which is for instance, packet filters on the customer and pairing and transit edge even. How many people actually do put ACLs that basically block any kind of traffic to their protected infrastructure? Do people actually do that on customer edge or pairing edge, or are they just filtering RFC 1918 in private address space? Are you preventing people from sourcing packets from your internal networks into your network? The thing is control plane policing. How many people are actually doing it? How many people are actually rate limiting, ICMP messages being generated or matching on TTLs? Are there specific types of traffic that you're even allowing in the network? For instance, do you allow packets with IP options in the network, or do you just drop it? Are there specific options you permit, or do you deny them? Is BGP flow spec, for instance, is that actually used in the network? Do you use it internally within your AS domain, or do you actually pair with it externally and actually exchange flow routes with another party? Another one is customer or pair prefixless filters. Are you preventing somebody from advertising your own space next to you? If you have loopbacks that come out of a specific allocation, what's to stop somebody off net from advertising a /24, and all your SNMP gets and writes potentially go off net, and then they get the community strings, and then they can use it back on you? things like that. AS path filters, are you doing it on your customers so they can't just prepend whatever AS they want to? And that's it for that one. Final part goes into individual operator concerns. So this covers, it's kind of a broad section. It goes into, is IGP growth within your network a real problem, or it's just so small it doesn't matter? One of the questions goes into, how large is your IGP as it is, and does it concern you if the growth, or it's not a big deal? Do you redistribute anything in your IGP? Have you ever had that happen and everything melt down? Other sections go into, BGP and Internet IPv4 growth. How are you looking at fixing that? Are you looking at defaulting to another box that has the full table and just keep partial routes within your network? Things like that. Other things go into traffic scaling with, your existing platforms. So it's like 40 gigs per slot working really well for you. Are you looking at multi-chassis platforms? Do you have faith in multi-chassis platforms that they're ready to go, or they're still in their infancy? What works there? Other questions go around SONET and SDH versus Ethernet. Do you have an issue with using LAN PHY between two different offices where it goes through a transport system, or where you need that sort of alarming, or does BFD and other OAM things do the job for you? So it kind of goes into a lot of different concerns and talks about 40 gig and 100 gig and tries to get your opinion on that. So, and then here's the URL. And I think the last question on there is a comment. So if there's anything that wasn't like a properly well done question, or you need to have, additional feedback to something, you can actually submit it there. And that's pretty much about it. Hopefully, get one response per organization. And the survey, it's on SurveyMonkey. It's configured to not record any IP addresses, so we're not trying to identify who's actually submitting these, and trying to keep it anonymous as possible. And hopefully, I'll leave it open for a few weeks, or at least until it seems like nobody's submitting anything any longer on it. And then basically produce the results in a nice format and either send it back to the list or to future NADOG. So that's about it.
Any questions for Tom on the survey? If you have enable and otherwise have the clue to participate, please support the survey. Sounds great. Hopefully will lead to lots of future interesting talks.
Hey, Tom, before you go, can you add threats to your survey?
You want to be able to submit threats?
Perceived threats, yes, physical and, financial, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, we could probably do that.
It just seemed like it was missing.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks, Ted. Next up